I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. Failure. You're a complete failure. The words stung like acid as they left my son Raphael's mouth. His wife Gabriella stood beside him, her perfectly manicured hand resting on his shoulder, a smirk playing across her Botox-enhanced lips. We were in the middle of an elegant restaurant, surrounded by other families celebrating Mother's Day. I sat there, a 64-year-old woman dressed in modest clothing, seemingly defeated while everyone watched. The waiters averted their eyes, embarrassed to witness my humiliation. Other diners stared with that peculiar mix of pity and morbid curiosity people reserve for public family dramas. But what my son and his wife didn't know was that in my simple handbag, I carried a small golden envelope that would change everything in the next few minutes. With a calmness that surprised even me, I slowly reached into my purse and slid the envelope across the glass table. Gabriella looked at it with contempt. "What is this now? Another one of your pathetic attempts to get attention?" The cruelty in her voice was familiar. I had heard it countless times over the years. I took a deep breath, and when I finally spoke, my voice came out as serene as ice. "Raphael, perhaps you should explain to your wife why the $10,000 monthly allowance you receive is going to disappear in the next 5 minutes. Raphael's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "And maybe you could tell your in-laws, Thomas and Eleanor, why the $2 million mansion they're living in will be gone before dessert arrives." Eleanor Blackwell nearly choked on her champagne. "Oh, and don't forget to explain to Bradley why the construction company he thinks is his will cease to exist before we leave this restaurant." The panic that spread across their faces was immediate. Raphael turned pale as if he'd seen a ghost. Gabriella's hands began to shake so badly she dropped her wine glass, the red liquid spreading across the white tablecloth like blood on snow. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Raphael's voice cracked. "You have nothing. We've been supporting you for years. You live off the $500 we send you each month." I smiled, a real smile I hadn't shown in decades. "I think it's time you met the real Laura Perez." But to understand how I arrived at this moment of sweet justice, I need to take you back 6 months, when I made the decision to become the invisible woman in my own family. 6 months ago, I was exactly what I appeared to be, a 64-year-old grandmother living a seemingly modest life. My daily routine was predictable. I woke up at 6 o'clock a.m. in my small 2-bedroom house in the Oakwood district, made black coffee in an old pot I'd bought at a flea market, and sat in my worn armchair to read the newspaper. My house was deliberately humble. Cream-colored walls that needed a fresh coat of paint, furniture I'd bought second-hand, and basic appliances that worked but looked worn from years of use. My refrigerator was covered with family photos where I always appeared smiling next to Raphael and Gabriella, the perfect grandmother who unconditionally adored her family. Those photos hurt me every time I looked at them because they showed a happiness that no longer existed in reality. My son Raphael was 42 and seemed to be the successful man he had always dreamed of being. Tall with perfectly combed dark hair, he always wore expensive suits paired with Swiss watches that cost more than what most people earn in a year. He drove a new silver Mercedes-Benz, lived in a mansion in the exclusive Beacon Heights neighborhood, and boasted of being the founder of Perez Construction, a company he supposedly built with his intelligence and determination. Gabriella, my 38-year-old daughter-in-law, was the perfect definition of a trophy wife. Platinum blonde with extensions down to her waist, always impeccable acrylic nails, and a collection of designer dresses that changed with the seasons. Her lips were permanently plumped with Botox, her eyebrows perfectly shaped with microblading, and she never left the house without makeup that took over an hour to apply. She drove a red Mercedes-Benz that Raphael had given her for her birthday and spent her days between the spa, the exclusive gym, and luxury shopping. Gabriella's parents, Thomas and Eleanor Blackwell, lived with them in the mansion. Thomas was a 65-year-old man who had retired early thanks to Raphael's generosity. He had gotten him a well-paying position at the construction company. Eleanor tended to the mansion's garden and cooked for the whole family. They treated Raphael as if he were the family's savior, the perfect son-in-law who had rescued their daughter from a life of mediocrity. Every Sunday, religiously, I would visit the mansion for family lunch. I would arrive in my small, white 2010 Toyota that made strange noises as it climbed the steep hills to Beacon Heights. I always brought a homemade dessert, chocolate cakes, coconut flames, or oatmeal cookies. My gifts were received with forced smiles and condescending comments like, "Oh, you shouldn't have," or "How sweet, you're always so thoughtful." The family dynamic was perfectly clear from the moment I walked through the front door. I was the second-class guest, the poor grandmother who depended on the kindness of her successful son. They seated me in the least comfortable chair in the dining room, served me on the oldest plates, and my opinions were ignored or dismissed with nervous laughter. Gabriella always found subtle ways to remind me of my place in the family hierarchy. "Laura, how are you managing with the house expenses?" she would ask with fake concern as she cut her imported steak. "I hope the $500 Raphael sends you each month is enough. We know it's hard to manage money at your age." Her comments always came with a small smile that didn't reach her eyes, the expression she used when she wanted to make me feel small and grateful. Raphael, for his part, had developed the habit of talking to me as if I were a child who needed simple explanations to understand the world. "Mom, you have to understand that maintaining this house costs a lot of money," he would say without making eye contact. "The property taxes are $8,000 a year, not to mention maintenance, utilities, and food for 5 people. We make a huge effort to help you with that $500 a month." What truly broke my heart was seeing how they had built a perfect narrative where they were the generous heroes and I was the grateful beneficiary. Bradley Thompson, Raphael's business partner, frequently visited the house to discuss business. They always introduced me as Raphael's mom who lives on a very small pension, but we help her because family is the most important thing. Bradley was a 45-year-old man, balding with a prominent belly that he tried to hide with expensive vests. He had a way of speaking that betrayed his humble origins, but he managed to project an image of sophistication that was more comical than convincing. "Mrs. Perez, what a pleasure to see you," he would say with condescension. "Raphael always tells us how proud he is to be able to take care of you in your old age." Sundays had become a ritual of subtle but constant humiliation. After lunch, while the men retired to the study to discuss business over 500 bottles of whiskey, Gabriella would drag me to the kitchen under the pretext of helping with the dishes. It was there that she really showed her true nature, where she took off the mask of the polite daughter-in-law and told me exactly what she thought of me. "Laura, I think it's time we spoke frankly," she had said one particularly cruel Sunday while drying a crystal glass with dramatically careful movements. "You're getting older, and frankly these weekly visits are becoming a burden for all of us. Raphael works hard all week. Sundays are his only day off, and having to worry about entertaining you is becoming exhausting." But all of that was about to change forever, because what they didn't know was that the real Laura Perez had been observing, taking notes, and preparing the most brilliant move of her life. That Sunday evening, after another humiliating lunch at Raphael and Gabriella's mansion, I drove my noisy Toyota away from Beacon Heights. But instead of heading to the modest house in Oakwood that my family believed was my only residence, I took a different route. 40 minutes later, I pulled into the private underground parking garage of the Grand Meridian, the most exclusive residential building in the financial district. The security guard smiled warmly as he recognized me. "Good evening, Mrs. Perez. How was your Sunday?" Enlightening as always, Michael, I replied, handing him a container of homemade cookies. These are for you and the team. You're too kind, ma'am. Your daughter called earlier to confirm your dinner tomorrow night. I smiled, thinking of my actual daughter Camila, who lived in Boston with her husband and children, a part of my life that Raphael and Gabriella knew nothing about. The elevator whisked me directly to the 25th floor. As the doors opened, I stepped into what was actually my real home, a 30,000 square foot penthouse with panoramic views of the entire city. The space was the perfect reflection of who I truly was, elegant but not ostentatious, with original artwork from emerging local artists adorning the walls, a library filled with biographies of female entrepreneurs and financial investment books, and a state-of-the-art kitchen that reflected my passion for cooking. I kicked off my sensible shoes, changed out of my poor grandmother clothes, and slipped into a comfortable silk loungewear set. Within minutes, my doorbell rang. "Right on time as always, Marcus," I said, opening the door to my attorney of 25 years. Marcus Hayes, a distinguished African-American man in his late 50s, stepped in carrying his briefcase and a bottle of wine. "I figured you'd need this after another performance at Raphael's house," he said, handing me the bottle of my favorite Cabernet. As I poured us each a glass, Marcus spread documents across my dining table: bank statements, property deeds, investment portfolios, and corporate records. To an outsider, these papers might have looked like ordinary business documents, but they revealed the truth about Laura Perez. I was worth over $75 million. "So how was today's episode of The Ungrateful Son and His Horrible Wife?" Marcus asked, adjusting his glasses as he reviewed the latest financial reports. I sighed, taking a sip of wine. "Worse than usual. Raphael called me financially irresponsible for buying a new coffee maker last month. He lectured me for 15 minutes about how I should be saving the money they generously give me." Marcus shook his head. "If he only knew the irony. His entire lifestyle exists because of you." "That's the point, isn't it? I never wanted him to know." I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the glittering city below. After James died, I promised I'd ensure Raphael would grow up to be a good man, not dependent on his family's wealth. I wanted him to develop his own character. 15 years ago, when my husband James passed away from a sudden heart attack, he left behind not just a grieving family, but a fortune built through smart investments and real estate development. Raphael was already an adult with his own career path by then, but I'd made a decision that would shape our future in ways I couldn't have anticipated. "I remember when you set up those shell companies," Marcus said. "Pacific Investments to hold the properties, Atlantic Securities for the investment portfolios, and Continental Holdings as the majority stakeholder in Perez Construction. All technically owned by you, but structured in a way that Raphael would think they were independent entities supporting his business." I turned back from the window. The plan was simple. Give Raphael opportunities without him knowing they came from family money. I wanted to see what kind of man he would become if he thought he was building everything himself. "And instead of humility, he developed arrogance," Marcus observed. "It wasn't always like this," I said softly. "The first few years he was grateful for the opportunities that came his way. The initial investors who believed in his construction company, the clients who hired him despite his limited experience, the banks that approved loans that seemed too good to be true. All me, working behind the scenes." "So what changed?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. "Gabriella," I said. "From the moment she entered his life 7 years ago, everything shifted. At first I tried to like her. I really did. But I watched her systematically isolate Raphael from his old friends, push him toward more extravagant spending, and most painfully, change his attitude toward me. I picked up a framed photo from my bookshelf, Raphael and me at his college graduation, both of us beaming with pride. Before her, he would call me every other day. We would have dinner together at least once a week. He valued my opinion and treated me with respect. And that's when you decided to play the role of the poor widow, Marcus concluded. I nodded. It was supposed to be temporary, just a test to see how they would treat me if they thought I had nothing to offer them. Would they still show me love and respect if I appeared to be financially dependent on them? And they failed that test spectacularly, Marcus said, gathering the documents. What bothers me most isn't that they think I'm poor. It's how they treat me because of it. I sat down heavily on my custom Italian leather sofa. The condescension, the dismissal, the way they talk about me to others as if I'm a burden they nobly bear. So what's the plan now, Laura? You've been playing this character for 3 years. How much longer will you continue? I took another sip of wine, my mind made up. Not much longer. I'm getting tired of being treated like a second-class citizen in my own family. I need to know if there's anything worth salvaging in my relationship with my son. Marcus raised an eyebrow. And if there isn't? Then it's time for the real Laura Perez to make her appearance, and for Raphael and Gabriella to learn that actions have consequences. Just then my secure phone line rang. I checked the caller ID and smiled. It's Robert Chen, my head of legal at Pacific Investments. Let me take this. It's about Raphael's latest construction project. I put the call on speaker. Laura, I thought you should know. Raphael and Bradley just signed a contract for the Los Pinos residential complex. They're promising completion in 12 months with a budget of $3.2 million. And what's the problem? I asked, already suspecting the answer. Based on our analysis, that project requires at least $5.5 million in 18 months to be completed properly. They're severely underbidding to get the contract, assuming you'll bail them out through the shell companies like always. I exchanged a knowing look with Marcus. Thank you, Robert. Please proceed as usual for now, but flag any fund transfers over $200,000 for my personal approval. After hanging up, I turned to Marcus. They're getting more reckless, taking bigger risks because they've always been mysteriously lucky in their business ventures. They have no idea that their safety net is about to disappear. So what's the next step? Marcus asked. I walked over to my desk and pulled out a small notebook. My record of every dismissive comment, every humiliation, every act of disrespect I'd endured over the past 3 years. I'm going to continue observing for a little while longer, but I'm also going to start gathering evidence and preparing my exit strategy. When the time comes, I want there to be no doubt about what they've done and why they're facing the consequences. Marcus nodded, understanding the determination in my voice. Just be careful, Laura. Family conflicts can get messier than any business deal. I know, I said quietly. But sometimes the only way to heal a relationship is to tear down the lies it's built on and see if anything true remains. The following morning, I traded my humble appearance for what some might call my CEO uniform. A tailored charcoal suit, subtle pearl earrings, and low Louboutin heels. My hair, which I usually kept in a simple bun when visiting Raphael, was now professionally styled in a sleek bob that framed my face. This was the real me, Laura Perez, business magnate and shrewd investor. The Pacific Investments headquarters occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming skyscraper downtown. As I walked through the glass doors, employees straightened their postures and greeted me with genuine respect, not the condescending acknowledgement I received at Raphael's house. Good morning, Mrs. Perez, my executive assistant, Diane, said as she walked alongside me toward the conference room. The quarterly meeting is about to start. All department heads are present, and Robert Chen has prepared the special presentation you requested about Perez Construction's finances. Thank you, Diane. And the surveillance setup? All ready in your private office. You'll be able to monitor the meeting between Raphael, Bradley, and the potential investors for the Los Pinos project. I nodded, feeling a twinge of guilt about spying on my son. But this wasn't mere curiosity, it was necessary research. I needed to understand exactly how far Raphael's deception went, not just toward me, but toward others as well. The quarterly meeting proceeded efficiently. My management team presented reports on our various investments and holdings. The hotel chain in Florida, the tech startups in California, the shopping centers in Arizona, and, of course, the construction projects overseen by Perez Construction. Robert Chen, my head of legal counsel, a precise man in his early 50s with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses, stood to deliver his report. Mrs. Perez, as you requested, we've completed a thorough analysis of all financial interactions between our shell companies and Perez Construction over the past 5 years. He displayed a complex chart showing the flow of money. To the casual observer, it would appear that Perez Construction was securing legitimate financing from various independent investors. Only those in this room knew that every arrow ultimately led back to me. The pattern has become increasingly concerning, Robert continued. What started as occasional support, helping them secure contracts and providing emergency funding, has evolved into systematic dependency. In the last fiscal year alone, 82% of Perez Construction's operating capital came directly or indirectly from your companies. Jessica Martinez, my CFO, a brilliant young woman with a piercing analytical mind, jumped in. More worrying is their spending pattern. Their overhead has increased by 143% in 3 years, primarily in non-essential categories: luxury office renovations, excessive executive compensation, corporate retreats at 5-star resorts, and a fleet of vehicles that far exceeds their actual needs. I absorbed this information with a calm exterior that masked my inner disappointment. And what about their actual construction work, the quality? This time it was Michael Rodriguez, my project oversight manager, who spoke. Mixed reviews, ma'am. Their early projects were solid. Raphael was hands-on, focused on quality and client satisfaction. But in the last 2 years, there's been a noticeable decline. They've had 3 projects with significant delays, 2 with budget overruns that you had to quietly cover, and 1 with serious quality issues that resulted in client complaints. I nodded, making notes. And this coincides with when? With 2 key developments, Robert answered. First, when Raphael promoted Bradley Thompson to full partner despite his lack of construction experience or financial investment. And second, when Raphael and Gabriella upgraded to the mansion in Beacon Heights and began their more extravagant lifestyle, I finished for him. Exactly, Robert confirmed. I closed my notebook. Thank you, everyone. Please continue monitoring the situation as usual. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to check on something in my office. Once alone in my private office, I activated the secure surveillance system that had been legally installed in the Perez Construction conference room. As a majority stakeholder through my shell companies, I had every right to monitor these meetings, though Raphael had no idea who was really watching. On my screen appeared Raphael, Bradley, and 2 men in expensive suits, the potential investors for the Los Pinos residential project. I turned up the volume. Gentlemen, what you're looking at is not just a housing development, Raphael was saying, his voice oozing confidence. It's a lifestyle revolution. 60 luxury condominiums, a rooftop pool, fitness center, and concierge service, all completed within 12 months, and at a price point that will generate at least 30% profit margin for all investors. One of the men frowned. Your budget seems optimistic, Mr. Perez. Most developments of this caliber in this area run significantly higher than your projection. Bradley jumped in. That's because most developers don't have our connections and efficiency. We've built relationships with suppliers and subcontractors over years that allow us to get premium materials at wholesale prices. I nearly laughed out loud at this blatant lie. The truth was that my companies had been subsidizing their material costs through complex purchasing arrangements. "And your track record?" the second investor asked. "Your portfolio is impressive, but I've heard rumors about delays on the Westfield project." Raphael's smile didn't waver. "Minor scheduling adjustments, completely normal in our industry. The project was delivered with full client satisfaction." Another lie. The Westfield project had been a near disaster, saved only by my emergency injection of $1.2 million and a team of expert contractors I'd quietly brought in to fix their mistakes. "And your financing?" the first investor pressed. "A project of this scale requires substantial capital reserves." Raphael leaned forward confidently. "We have solid backing from multiple investment groups. Atlantic Securities has been with us from the beginning, and Continental Holdings just renewed their commitment to our vision last quarter. Our financial foundation is unshakable." I turned off the screen, unable to watch anymore. Raphael wasn't just exaggerating. He was building his business on a foundation of lies, completely unaware that the entire structure existed only because I allowed it to. My phone rang. It was Marcus. "I just received the information from the private investigator," he said without preamble. "You need to see this right away." 30 minutes later, Marcus spread a new set of documents across my desk. Credit card statements, loan applications, and bank records. "It's worse than we thought," he said grimly. "Raphael has personal credit card debt exceeding $250,000. Gabriella has separate cards with another $180,000 in outstanding balances. They've taken out a second mortgage on the mansion that you technically own, and they're 3 payments behind." I felt physically ill. How is this possible? I provide them with $10,000 every month through the business profits they think they're earning. "Lifestyle inflation," Marcus explained. "Designer clothes, luxury vacations, memberships at 3 different country clubs, jewelry, art they know nothing about but buy to impress their friends. And then there's Gabriella's shopping addiction and Raphael's gambling during their trips to Las Vegas." I massaged my temples, feeling a headache coming on. "And what about Bradley Thompson? What did your investigator find on him?" Marcus handed me another folder. "Another interesting story. Bradley has no actual ownership stake in Perez Construction, despite what he and Raphael tell everyone. He's essentially a frontman who receives a 15% commission on projects, but has never invested a dime of his own money. So his partner status is just for show?" "Exactly. And there's more. He's been skimming from project budgets. Small amounts from multiple sources, probably thinking no one would notice since the funding always mysteriously appears when they need it." I stood up and walked to my window, looking out at the city my husband and I had built our fortune in. For years, I'd allowed Raphael to believe he was a self-made success, hoping it would shape him into a man of integrity and hard work. Instead, I'd created a monster of entitlement and deception. "I gave him everything," I said quietly. "Opportunities, connections, financial safety nets. All he had to do was work hard and be honest. Instead, he's become exactly the kind of person I never wanted him to be." "What will you do now?" Marcus asked. I turned back to face him, my decision made. "Continue gathering evidence. I need to see how deep this rabbit hole goes before I decide exactly how to proceed. And if it gets worse?" I picked up a photo of Raphael as a child, his innocent smile so different from the arrogant smirk he wore now. "Then I'll have to do something I've been avoiding for years. I'll have to let my son face the real consequences of his actions." What I didn't know then was that things would indeed get much worse, and much sooner than I expected. The following Sunday, I arrived at Raphael and Gabriella's mansion as usual, carrying a freshly baked apple pie, my late husband's favorite recipe. The weather matched my inner turmoil. Gray clouds threatening rain, a chilly wind that cut through my deliberately modest coat. Something felt different as soon as Raphael opened the door. His usual forced smile was replaced by barely concealed irritation. "You're early, Mom," he said, checking his expensive watch. "We said 1 o'clock, and it's only 12:30. "I'm sorry, I thought—" "Whatever, just come in. Gabriella's friends are here, so try not to embarrass us." I stepped into the foyer, the smell of expensive perfume and pretension hanging in the air. Through the archway to the living room, I could see Gabriella surrounded by 3 women who looked like her clones, all blonde, all surgically enhanced, all draped in designer clothing. "Oh, Laura's here early," Gabriella announced loudly as I entered. "Ladies, this is Raphael's mother. Laura, these are my friends from the Beacon Heights Country Club, Sophia, Madison, and Jennifer." The women gave me identical plastic smiles, their eyes quickly assessing and dismissing me based on my appearance. "How nice to meet you," said the one named Sophia, her tone suggesting it was anything but nice. I smiled warmly, determined not to let them see how their judgment affected me. "The pleasure is mine. I brought apple pie for dessert." Gabriella glanced at the pie container with visible disdain. "Oh, you shouldn't have. We have a catered lunch today. Chef Maurice prepared a special dessert." "I'll just put this in the kitchen then," I said, turning to leave the room. "Actually," Gabriella called after me, "just leave it by the door. We'll find something to do with it later." The dismissal was clear. As I set the pie down, I heard Gabriella stage whisper to her friends, "She doesn't understand that we don't eat homemade food here. It's sweet, but so quaint." Their laughter felt like needles on my skin. Lunch was a new exercise in humiliation. Instead of my usual place at the far end of the table, I discovered they had set up a small folding table in the corner of the dining room, separate from the main group. "We had to adjust the seating," Raphael explained without meeting my eyes. "Gabriella invited some important people from the club, and the table only seats 8. So I sat alone, served last, while the conversation flowed around me as if I were invisible. Thomas and Eleanor Blackwell, Gabriella's parents, occasionally shot me sympathetic glances, but never enough courage to challenge the arrangement. Bradley Thompson arrived midway through the meal with his wife Jessica, a nervous woman who seemed perpetually afraid of saying the wrong thing. They both barely acknowledged my presence, following Raphael and Gabriella's lead in treating me as insignificant. "The Los Pinos project is going to be our biggest success yet," Bradley announced to the table, champagne glass in hand. "The investors were practically begging to be part of it after our presentation." "That's because my husband is a business genius," Gabriella declared, placing her hand possessively on Raphael's arm. "He could sell sand in the desert. If only they knew that the investors had only agreed after receiving reassurances from one of my shell companies that their investment was protected." "Speaking of business," Raphael said, lowering his voice conspiratorially, "we're considering expanding to commercial properties next year. There's a downtown development that could double our company's value." More lies. The downtown development was a project my company had been working on for months, and I had been considering whether to let Raphael's company bid on a small portion of it. After the meal, as the men gathered in Raphael's study and the women moved to the patio for coffee, Gabriella cornered me in the kitchen. "Laura, I need you to do me a favor," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "The cleaning service couldn't come yesterday, and the guest bathroom upstairs needs attention before my book club arrives at 4. There are cleaning supplies under the sink." I stared at her, momentarily speechless. "You want me to clean your bathroom?" "Well, you're here anyway, and it's not like you have anything important to do," she said with a dismissive wave. Besides, at your age, it's good to stay active. For a moment, I considered revealing everything right then, showing her exactly who Laura Perez really was. But instead, I took a deep breath. Of course, Gabriella. Happy to help. Her smile was triumphant as she handed me a pair of yellow rubber gloves. Thank you. Oh, and when you're done with that, the windows in the sunroom could use a wipe down, too. As I climbed the stairs with cleaning supplies in hand, I heard her laughing with her friends on the patio. I found the perfect solution to our maid quitting, free labor from the mother-in-law. Their cackling laughter followed me up the stairs. As I cleaned the already spotless bathroom, clearly a task assigned purely to humiliate me, I heard voices from the partially open door of Raphael's study across the hall. Curiosity drew me closer. Getting worse with age, Raphael was saying. She's becoming more dependent, more needy. These weekly visits are exhausting. You're a good son for taking care of her, came Bradley's voice. Most people would have put her in a home by now. We've actually been researching options, Raphael replied, making my blood run cold. Gabriella found a place called Sunset Gardens. It's not too expensive, but would keep her comfortable. And what about her house? Thomas Blackwell asked. If she moves to a facility, what happens to it? It's not worth much, Raphael said dismissively, but whatever we get from selling it could help cover the costs of the home. She has no idea how to manage her finances anyway. I stood frozen, cleaning cloth in hand as they casually discussed disposing of me like an inconvenient piece of furniture. My own son was plotting to put me away, to sell my home, all while presenting himself as the generous caretaker. The hardest part will be convincing her it's for her own good, Raphael continued. We'll need to approach it carefully, make her think it's her idea somehow. Leave that to Gabriella, Bradley laughed. She could convince a drowning man to buy water. I silently backed away, my mind racing. This wasn't just casual cruelty anymore. This was a coordinated plan to remove me from their lives while maintaining their facade of familial devotion. When I finished cleaning both the bathroom and the windows, I found Gabriella in the kitchen. I'm not feeling well, I told her, which wasn't a lie. I felt physically ill after what I'd overheard. I think I'll head home early today. She barely looked up from her phone. Oh, that's too bad. We were going to discuss something important with you later. I guess it can wait until next Sunday. The something important was clear to me now. Their plan to convince me to enter a retirement home. Yes, next Sunday, I said, my voice steady despite my inner turmoil. I wouldn't miss it for anything. As I drove away from Beacon Heights, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, I made a decision. The time for passive observation was over. I needed to know everything, every lie, every manipulation, every plan they had made behind my back. And I knew exactly how to find out. It was time to bring in professional help. The following morning, I sat in a downtown cafe, far from both my penthouse and the modest house in Oakwood. Across from me was Arthur Miller, a 53-year-old former police detective who now specialized in private investigations, particularly family fraud cases. Arthur didn't look like a detective from the movies. He was of average height with a forgettable face and nondescript clothing, qualities that made him excellent at his job. People rarely noticed him, which allowed him to observe everything. Mrs. Perez, he said, his voice low and professional. I've reviewed the information you sent over. Before we proceed, I need to confirm. You're aware that investigating your own family is a delicate matter that could potentially damage relationships permanently. I stirred my coffee slowly. Mr. Miller, I believe those relationships are already damaged beyond repair. What I need now is the truth. Objective, documented evidence of what's happening when I'm not present. He nodded, opening a small notebook. Based on what you've told me, we're looking at potential financial exploitation, psychological manipulation, and possibly a conspiracy to misappropriate your assets. Am I understanding correctly? Yes, and I suspect there's more I haven't discovered yet. My approach would be comprehensive but discreet, Arthur explained. Digital surveillance of communications when legal, financial investigation of both personal and business accounts, and physical surveillance as needed. I won't do anything that could compromise you legally. I understand, and I want everything documented, recordings, photographs, financial records. Whatever you find, I need evidence that would stand up to scrutiny. Arthur studied me carefully. May I ask a personal question, Mrs. Perez? Why go through all this? From what I understand, you could simply reveal your true financial status and end their schemes immediately. I gazed out the window at the passing pedestrians, ordinary people living ordinary lives untouched by the kind of betrayal I was experiencing. Because this isn't just about money, Mr. Miller. It's about character. I need to know exactly who my son has become, not just what he does when he thinks I have money, but what he does when he thinks I have nothing. Only then can I make a decision about our future relationship, if there's to be one at all. Arthur nodded, seeming to understand. I'll need about 2 weeks for a preliminary investigation. Is there anything specific you want me to focus on first? Yes, I said, sliding a note across the table. This retirement facility, Sunset Gardens, I want to know everything about it, especially any connection to Raphael, Gabriella, or anyone associated with them. 2 weeks later, Arthur and I met again, this time in Marcus's law office for additional privacy and legal protection. The manila folders he placed on the conference table looked innocuous, but I knew they contained the painful truth about my family. Mrs. Perez, I've completed the initial phase of the investigation, Arthur began, his expression grave. I should warn you, the findings are troubling. I'm prepared, I said, though I wondered if that was truly possible. He opened the first folder. Let's start with the financial situation. Your son and daughter-in-law are effectively insolvent without your support. They've accumulated personal debts exceeding $430,000 across credit cards, personal loans, and luxury purchases on installment plans. The mansion is 3 months behind on mortgage payments, and they've recently been denied a third refinancing attempt. Marcus, who sat beside me taking notes, shook his head in disbelief. And all while receiving $10,000 monthly from Laura's companies. Their spending is extraordinary, Arthur continued, showing me spreadsheets detailing their expenses. Designer clothing, weekly spa treatments, country club memberships, lavish parties, gambling debts in Las Vegas and Atlantic City. Mrs. Gabriella Perez spent $37,000 on handbags alone in the past 6 months. I felt a hollowness in my chest as I reviewed the evidence of their extravagance. And the business? Perez Construction? Arthur's expression darkened further. It's essentially a shell. Without your financial backing, it would have collapsed years ago. They maintain a facade of success, but internally, it's chaotic. They've been cutting corners on materials, underpaying contractors, and misrepresenting project statuses to clients. And Bradley Thompson? As you suspected, he has no actual investment in the company. He receives 15% of gross profits as a partner, but his primary function appears to be as a frontman for client meetings and networking events. He also... Arthur hesitated. Please continue, I urged. He's been embezzling from project budgets, approximately $175,000 over the past 2 years. Your son either doesn't know or chooses to ignore it. The betrayal stung, but I wasn't surprised. And what about Sunset Gardens? The retirement facility? Arthur opened another folder, revealing photographs of a facility that looked nothing like the luxury retirement community they had likely described to others. Sunset Gardens presents itself as an upscale retirement community, but it has a troubling history. There have been multiple complaints about understaffing, medication mismanagement, and substandard care. It's one of the few facilities that accept residents with minimal financial verification and no waiting period. My stomach turned. So it's a convenient place to dump an unwanted parent. Essentially, yes, Arthur confirmed. And there's more. I've documented multiple conversations between Raphael and Gabriella discussing plans to have you declared mentally incompetent after placement in the facility. He played an audio recording captured from Gabriella's phone. Once she's in Sunset Gardens, we start the process, Raphael's voice said. Dr. Winters said he can provide documentation of cognitive decline for the court petition. After 6 months, we can apply for guardianship and gain control of her finances and property. What about her bank accounts? Gabriella asked. She must have some savings. Probably not much, but every bit helps. The house should sell for at least $30,000 in this market, enough to cover a year at Sunset Gardens. After that, Medicare takes over and we're free. The casual cruelty in their voices made me physically ill. They weren't just trying to distance themselves from me. They were planning to legally strip me of my autonomy and steal what little they thought I had. There's one more thing, Arthur said, hesitating again. It's about Gabriella's phone communications with her sister Victoria. He played another recording, this one even more devastating. You have no idea how easy it was, Gabriella's voice said, laughing. The old hag is so desperate for family connection that she'll believe anything. Raphael acts like it's such a sacrifice to help her, but honestly, we'll save money once she's locked away in Sunset Gardens. Victoria's voice replied, What if she refuses to go? That's the beauty of it, Gabriella said. Dad's friend Judge Harrison owes him a favor, one signature declaring her incompetent and she has no choice. In 6 months, we sell the house, access whatever savings she has, and she becomes the state's problem. She'll be so medicated she won't even know what happened. The laughter that followed chilled me to the bone. When the recording ended, I sat in silence for several minutes, processing the depth of betrayal. My own son, the child I had raised, loved, and secretly supported throughout his adult life, was plotting to have me declared incompetent and institutionalized, not for my benefit, but to rid himself of what he saw as a burden. Mrs. Perez, Arthur said gently, there's more evidence in these files, text messages, emails, financial records, but I think you've heard enough to understand the situation. I nodded slowly, my mind made up. Yes, I have. Thank you for your thoroughness, Mr. Miller. After Arthur left, Marcus turned to me. Laura, I'm so sorry. This is beyond anything we anticipated. I squared my shoulders, a strange calm settling over me. Actually, it's exactly what I needed to know. Now there can be no doubt, no second-guessing my decision. And what is that decision? It's time to end this charade, Marcus, but not with a simple revelation. They've spent years humiliating me, planning to discard me and stealing from me without knowing it was me. Now they need to understand the consequences of their actions. I picked up my phone and dialed Robert Chen. Robert, I need you to prepare full documentation of all connections between my companies and Perez Construction. Every dollar, every contract, every property deed. And I want it ready by Mother's Day. Mother's Day? Marcus asked after I ended the call. That's only 3 weeks away. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Yes. What better occasion for a mother to show her child how well she knows him? Raphael and Gabriella have planned their little ambush for me, but they have no idea I'm planning one of my own. As I gathered the folders of evidence, a text message appeared on my phone. It was from Gabriella. Don't forget to wear something nice this Sunday. We're having special guests for lunch and need you to look presentable for once." The condescension in those simple words confirmed that I was making the right decision. "Marcus," I said, my voice steady and determined, "I need you to help me prepare something special, a golden envelope containing their entire future. Or rather, the end of the future they thought they had. 3 weeks until Mother's Day. 3 weeks to prepare the most important lesson I would ever teach my son. That character matters more than money, and betrayal always has its price." The morning after my meeting with Arthur Miller, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. For too long, I had watched silently as Raphael and Gabriella built their empire of lies. Now it was time to assemble my own team, people I could trust to help me execute the perfect response to their betrayal. My first call was to Camilla, my daughter in Boston, the one family member who knew my entire truth. "Mom, are you sure about this?" she asked after I explained the situation. "Exposing everything could destroy your relationship with Raphael permanently." "Sweetheart, there's nothing left to destroy," I replied, gazing out at the city skyline from my penthouse. Arthur's investigation confirmed my worst fears. Raphael and Gabriella aren't just dismissive of me. They're actively planning to have me declared incompetent and institutionalized. Camilla's sharp intake of breath was audible even over the phone. "That's criminal, Mom. We should go to the police." "And tell them what? That my son who thinks I'm poor is trying to gain guardianship of me? But actually I'm secretly wealthy and have been financially supporting him for years without his knowledge? It's complicated, Camilla. No, this requires a different approach." "What can I do to help?" she asked without hesitation. "I need you to be ready to fly in for Mother's Day. I want a witness from my side of the family present when everything comes to light." After arranging with Camilla, I called Robert Chen to discuss the documentation I needed for the confrontation. We met that afternoon in my office, where he spread dozens of documents across the conference table. "I've organized everything chronologically," Robert explained, his methodical mind perfect for this task. "These blue folders contain all property deeds, the mansion, the 3 Mercedes vehicles, and the vacation home in Lake Tahoe. The red folders hold the Perez Construction ownership documents, showing your 80% stake through Continental Holdings. The green folders contain bank statements tracking every dollar transferred to Raphael and Gabriella over the past 8 years. I examined the documents, impressed by his thoroughness. What about the recordings from Arthur's investigation? All digital evidence has been authenticated by a forensic specialist, Robert confirmed. The originals are secured on encrypted drives with certified copies ready for presentation. Everything is legally obtained and admissible should this ever escalate to court proceedings. I nodded, satisfied. And the immediate cessation documents? Robert handed me a slim black folder. All here. One signature activates the immediate termination of all financial support, revocation of property usage rights, and removal of Raphael and Bradley from company operations. The transition team is already prepared to take over Perez Construction Management within 24 hours of your decision. As I reviewed the documents, a sharp pain of regret pierced my heart. These papers represented the failure of my greatest hope, that my son would become a man of integrity without being shaped by wealth and privilege. Instead, he had developed a sense of entitlement so profound that he believed he had the right to discard his own mother when she became inconvenient. "There's one more thing," Robert said, his voice gentler. "The investigator discovered communications indicating that Raphael and Gabriella planned to make their move at Mother's Day lunch. They've invited Dr. Jonathan Ramsey, a geriatric specialist with a history of questionable competency evaluations. It appears they want him to begin documenting signs of cognitive decline. The calculated cruelty of their timing, using Mother's Day as the occasion to begin their plot against me, strengthened my resolve. Thank you, Robert. Please ensure everything is ready for Mother's Day. I'll handle the rest. Later that afternoon, I met with Diana Morris, a renowned public relations specialist who had helped manage my husband's public image during his business career. Now in her 60s, Diana had semi-retired but still consulted for select clients, mostly women navigating difficult transitions. "Laura, darling," she said as she entered my penthouse, elegant as ever in her tailored suit and statement jewelry. "When you called, I knew something extraordinary must be happening. You've maintained your double life for 3 years now?" "Too long," I admitted, pouring us both a glass of wine. It was supposed to be a temporary test of character. I never imagined it would reveal such darkness. Diana listened intently as I detailed Raphael and Gabriella's behavior and their plans for me. Her expression grew increasingly troubled. "This is beyond family dysfunction, Laura. This is predatory." "I know. That's why I need your guidance on how to handle the aftermath. When I reveal everything, there will be social repercussions. Raphael and Gabriella have built their entire social identity around being successful, generous people who take care of Raphael's mother. When that narrative collapses," Diana considered this carefully, "you need to control the narrative, not for revenge, but to protect yourself from their inevitable attempts to paint you as the villain, the deceitful mother who tricked her own son." "Exactly. I don't want to destroy Raphael publicly. Despite everything, he's still my son. But I need to ensure the truth is understood by those who matter." "We'll need a carefully calibrated approach," Diana mused. "Selective disclosure to key figures in your social and business circles, documentation ready for anyone who needs verification, and a clear, consistent explanation of why you chose this path in the first place." "My intentions were good," I said softly. "I wanted Raphael to develop character independent of family wealth." "Then that's our core message. This wasn't about deception. It was about allowing your son the dignity of believing he had earned his success." Diana paused. "Though the irony is painful, given how he's actually behaved." Our planning continued into the evening, with Diana helping me craft responses for every possible reaction, from Raphael's likely anger to potential questions from business associates. The following morning, I met with Emily Parker, a social worker specializing in elder abuse cases. Emily was younger than me, perhaps in her early 50s, with kind eyes that had seen too much and a determined set to her jaw that told me she was a fighter. "Mrs. Perez, after reviewing your case, I believe what you're experiencing meets the criteria for elder psychological abuse and attempted financial exploitation," she said, her voice professional but compassionate. "The recordings of your son and daughter-in-law discussing plans to have you declared incompetent are particularly concerning. I appreciate your assessment, Ms. Parker, but I'm not here seeking protection. I have the resources to protect myself," I explained. "I'm here because I want to understand how to turn this personal crisis into something that helps others." Emily's expression changed from concern to interest. "What do you have in mind?" "There must be others, elderly people without my financial resources who are being manipulated or exploited by family members. I'd like to establish a foundation to provide legal and psychological support for them." A smile spread across Emily's face. "That would be revolutionary, Mrs. Perez. The resources for elder abuse victims are woefully inadequate, especially when the abuse comes from family members. Most victims remain silent out of shame or fear." "Then let's change that," I said firmly. "I want to create an organization that provides free legal representation, safe housing options, and emotional support for older adults facing family exploitation. Can you help me design it?" "Absolutely," Emily nodded enthusiastically. "I've actually dreamed of creating something like this, but funding has always been the obstacle." "Funding won't be a problem," I assured her. "What I need is your expertise in creating a structure that truly serves the needs of vulnerable elders." We spent hours discussing the parameters of what would eventually become the Invisible Women Foundation, named for those like me who had been rendered invisible by society's dismissal of aging women. By the end of the week, my counterattack team was complete. Marcus handling legal matters, Robert managing the financial transitions, Arthur continuing his investigation to ensure we had complete evidence, Diana preparing for the public relations aspects, Emily developing the foundation concept, and Camilla providing emotional support. All that remained was to wait for Mother's Day, the day Raphael and Gabriella had chosen for their first move against me, unaware that it would instead mark the end of their charade. The Sunday before Mother's Day, I made my weekly visit to Raphael and Gabriella's mansion, playing my role as the humble, grateful mother one last time. The experience was surreal, knowing everything I now knew while watching their performance. "Mom, we're planning something special for Mother's Day next week," Raphael announced during lunch, exchanging meaningful glances with Gabriella. "We'd like you to dress nicely. That blue dress you wore to Christmas would be perfect. And we've invited some special guests," Gabriella added with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "People we really want you to meet." "How thoughtful," I replied, matching their false warmth with my own. "I'm looking forward to it." As I was preparing to leave, Gabriella pulled me aside in the foyer, her voice lowered to a conspiratorial whisper. "Laura, one of our guests next week is Dr. Ramsey. He's a specialist in senior care. We thought it might be good for you to talk with him about options for your future." "My future?" I asked innocently. "Well, you know, living arrangements, health considerations. At your age, it's important to plan ahead," she said with practiced concern. "Raphael and I have been worried about you living alone in that little house." The audacity of their deception was almost impressive. They had planned every detail. The special lunch to make it seem like a celebration, the doctor present to begin his assessment, the carefully scripted conversation about my future care. "How considerate of you both," I said, patting her hand. "You're right, it is important to plan for the future. I've been doing quite a bit of that myself lately." Something in my tone must have caught her attention, because Gabriella's eyes narrowed slightly. "Oh? What kind of plans?" I smiled mysteriously. "Nothing specific yet. Just considering my options. We can discuss it all next Sunday." As I drove away from their mansion for the second to last time, I felt a strange mix of sadness and determination. The next time I entered that house, nothing would ever be the same again. Mother's Day dawned bright and clear, as if nature itself approved of what was about to happen. I stood in front of my closet in my penthouse, considering my options carefully. This wasn't just about choosing an outfit. It was about making a statement. I'd bypassed the humble blue dress Raphael had suggested and instead selected a burgundy silk dress that was elegant without being ostentatious. I paired it with my mother's pearl necklace, the one heirloom I had allowed myself to wear even during my Poor Widow performances. My hair was professionally styled that morning, and I applied makeup that enhanced rather than hid my age. I wanted to look like exactly what I was, a successful, confident woman in her 60s. Before leaving, I opened my safe and removed the golden envelope containing the documents that would change everything. It felt heavy in my hands, weighted with years of deception and months of careful planning. My phone buzzed with a text from Camila. "Just landed. Meeting Marcus at his office first. We'll arrive 30 minutes after you, as planned. Love you, Mom. Stay strong." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice and truth. Raphael and Gabriella had made their choices. Now they would face the consequences. I drove my modest Toyota to their mansion one last time, the golden envelope secure in my handbag. When I arrived at precisely noon, I noticed several unfamiliar luxury vehicles parked in the circular driveway. Raphael and Gabriella had assembled quite an audience for what they thought would be the beginning of my removal from their lives. Raphael opened the door, his expression shifting from surprise to disapproval as he took in my appearance. "Mom, I thought you were going to wear the blue dress," he said by way of greeting. "I decided this was more appropriate for the occasion," I replied calmly. He shrugged, clearly deciding this wasn't worth arguing about. "Come in, we have several guests already here." The living room was filled with people dressed in their Sunday best. I recognized Gabriella's parents, Thomas and Eleanor Blackwell, standing near the fireplace. Bradley Thompson and his wife Jessica were engaged in conversation with an older man I presumed to be Dr. Ramsey. Two couples I recognized as Raphael and Gabriella's friends from the country club were seated on the sofas, sipping champagne. "Laura, you look different today," Gabriella said as she approached, her tone suggesting this wasn't a compliment. "Thank you, dear. Special day, special effort," I replied pleasantly. "Let me introduce you to our special guest," she said, guiding me toward the older man. "This is Dr. Jonathan Ramsey, a renowned specialist in geriatric medicine. Dr. Ramsey, this is Raphael's mother, Laura." Dr. Ramsey extended his hand, studying me with clinical interest. "A pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Perez. Your son and daughter-in-law have told me so much about you." "I'm sure they have," I said, meeting his gaze directly. "And what exactly have they told you?" A flicker of discomfort crossed his face. "Oh, just that you're a wonderful woman who might benefit from some specialized advice about senior living options." "How thoughtful of them," I said, my voice carrying just enough edge to make Gabriella shift nervously beside me. The lunch proceeded according to their plan at first. I was seated at the head of the table, a position of honor that had been denied me for years, now granted only because it made me more visible to Dr. Ramsey's observant eyes. Conversation flowed around topics carefully selected to emphasize my age and potential limitations. "Laura rarely drives at night anymore," Gabriella mentioned casually to Dr. Ramsey. "We worry about her vision." "The stairs in her little house concern us too," Raphael added. "One fall at her age could be catastrophic." I ate quietly, allowing them to build their case, noting how Dr. Ramsey occasionally jotted notes in a small notebook. The other guests watched with that peculiar mix of discomfort and fascination that accompanies public displays of familial concern. When dessert was served, an elaborate cake that no one at the table believed I could have afforded to provide, Raphael stood and raised his glass. "Today we celebrate mothers everywhere, but especially our dear Laura," he began, his voice dripping with false sentiment. "As a responsible family, we have been discussing how to ensure the best possible future for her as she enters this delicate stage of life." Gabriella stood beside him, placing her hand on his arm in a show of unified support. "We found a wonderful community called Sunset Gardens, where Laura will receive the care and attention she deserves. We've already begun the arrangements to make this transition as smooth as possible." The guests murmured approvingly, commending Raphael and Gabriella's apparent selflessness. Dr. Ramsey nodded sagely, as if this confirmed everything he had observed. "And to make this easier financially," Raphael continued, "we've decided to help Laura sell her house. The proceeds will cover much of her stay at Sunset Gardens, ensuring she won't be a burden on anyone." It was the word burden that signaled it was time. I slowly stood from my chair, feeling every eye in the room turn toward me. The silence that fell was immediate and complete. "Before we discuss my future living arrangements," I said, my voice clear and steady, "there are a few things everyone here should know." I reached into my handbag and removed the golden envelope, placing it deliberately on the table. Raphael and Gabriella exchanged nervous glances. "Raphael, my dear son," I began, maintaining perfect composure. Perhaps you could explain to your wife why the $10,000 monthly allowance you both receive is going to disappear in the next 5 minutes. Raphael's fork clattered to his plate. Mom, what are you talking about? We don't receive any allowance. We support you. I smiled, opening the envelope and removing the first document. This is a record of monthly transfers from Continental Holdings to your personal account. $10,000 every month for the past 8 years. Continental Holdings is a subsidiary of Pacific Investments, which is owned entirely by me. Gabriella's face drained of color. That's impossible. Those are business profits from Raphael's investors. There are no other investors, Gabriella, I continued calmly. I am the investor, the only investor. I have been funding Perez Construction since its inception. Bradley Thompson half rose from his chair. But I've met representatives from Continental Holdings. They weren't you. They were employees acting on my behalf, I explained, extracting more documents. Just as the representatives from Atlantic Securities and all the other companies that mysteriously supported your business ventures were working for me. I turned to Thomas and Eleanor Blackwell. Perhaps you'd like to explain to your parents, Gabriella, why the $2 million mansion where they live and the 3 Mercedes vehicles in the garage are going to disappear before dessert is finished. I slid the property deeds across the table. The mansion was purchased by Pacific Investments 15 years ago. The cars are all registered to my company. You have been living in my house, driving my cars, spending my money, all while treating me like an unwelcome burden. The silence in the room was deafening. Raphael had gone completely pale, his hands trembling as he reached for the documents. And finally, I said, turning to Bradley, you might want to explain to your business partner why the company you think belongs to you will cease to exist before we leave this restaurant. I placed the ownership documents on the table. Perez Construction is 80% owned by me through a series of holding companies. The remaining 20% is split between Raphael and you, Bradley, though I notice you've never actually invested any of your own money, despite claiming to be a full partner. The guests stared in shock, unable to process the complete reversal of everything they thought they knew about me and my relationship with Raphael. This is some kind of mistake, Raphael finally stammered. You live in that little house in Oakwood. You drive that old Toyota. You wear secondhand clothes. That was a choice, Raphael, I explained. A test of character that began when I noticed how your attitude toward me changed after you married Gabriella. I wanted to see how you would treat me if you thought I had nothing of material value to offer you. A test? Gabriella repeated incredulously. You've been lying to us for years? I never lied, I corrected her. I simply allowed you to believe what you wanted to believe. You assumed I was poor and dependent, and you treated me accordingly, with contempt, dismissal, and most recently, with a plan to have me declared mentally incompetent and institutionalized. Several guests gasped. Dr. Ramsey shifted uncomfortably in his seat. That's a ridiculous accusation, Raphael protested weakly. I removed my phone from my purse and pressed play on the recording Arthur had provided. Raphael's voice filled the dining room. Once she's in Sunset Gardens, we start the process. Dr. Winters said he can provide documentation of cognitive decline for the court petition. After 6 months, we can apply for guardianship and gain control of her finances and property. Then Gabriella's voice. What about her bank accounts? She must have some savings. Probably not much, but every bit helps. The house should sell for at least $30,000 in this market, enough to cover a year at Sunset Gardens. After that, Medicare takes over and we're free. As the recording ended, Thomas Blackwell stood up, his face flushed with anger. Raphael, is this true? Were you planning to institutionalize your mother against her will? Before Raphael could respond, I played another recording. Gabriella's conversation with her sister Victoria. The old hag is so desperate for family connection that she'll believe anything. Dad's friend Judge Harrison owes him a favor. one signature declaring her incompetent, and she has no choice. Eleanor Blackwell covered her mouth in horror, turning to her daughter with tears in her eyes. "Gabriella, how could you?" The room erupted into chaos. Accusations, denials, exclamations of shock. Through it all, I remained standing, calm at the center of the storm I had unleashed. When the initial furor subsided, I spoke again. "I wanted to believe the best of you, Raphael. I raised you to value character over wealth, honesty over appearance, family over status. The fact that you failed so completely when tested breaks my heart, but it also frees me from doubt about what must happen next." I removed my phone again and dialed a number I had memorized. "Marcus, Laura Perez. Please proceed with all the cancellations immediately." Raphael's eyes widened in panic. "What cancellations?" "First, the immediate termination of all financial support to you and Perez Construction. Second, eviction notices for this mansion, effective in 30 days. Third, revocation of all permissions to use the vehicles registered in my name." Bradley had turned ashen. "But we have contracts with clients, obligations. The current contracts will be transferred to the new management team that will take over Perez Construction tomorrow morning," I explained. "I've decided to put real professionals in charge, people who don't misrepresent their qualifications or embezzle from project budgets." Bradley sank back into his chair, devastated by the revelation that I knew about his financial misconduct. The doorbell rang, momentarily interrupting the unfolding drama. Gabriella, moving mechanically like someone in shock, went to answer it. She returned with Camilla and Marcus, looking confused. "Mom?" Raphael said, staring at Camilla in disbelief. "You have another child?" "This is your sister Camilla," I confirmed. "She lives in Boston with her husband and children. A part of my life I chose not to share with you because of how you treated me." "Another lie," Gabriella muttered bitterly. "No, Gabriella. Another consequence of your behavior," Camilla corrected her, her voice ice cold. "Mom kept me away from you because she didn't want me to see how cruelly you treated her. She was protecting both of us, me from seeing my brother's betrayal, and you from facing my reaction to it." Marcus stepped forward, placing a leather portfolio on the table. "Mrs. Perez, the documents are ready for your signature whenever you're prepared to proceed." Dr. Ramsey, who had been watching the scene unfold with increasing discomfort, stood to leave. "I think my services won't be needed after all. Mrs. Perez clearly does not require any evaluation of her cognitive abilities." "Actually, Dr. Ramsey, I'd appreciate if you stayed," I said. "As a medical professional, you should be aware that what Raphael and Gabriella were attempting constitutes elder abuse. I've decided not to pursue criminal charges at this time, but I would like you to witness what happens next." The doctor reluctantly resumed his seat, now a witness to the complete reversal of power in the room. Raphael, who had been silent for several minutes, finally looked up at me with tears in his eyes. "Mom, I don't understand. Why would you do this to me? To us?" The genuine confusion in his voice nearly broke my heart. Even now, facing the consequences of his actions, he couldn't understand that he had brought this on himself. "I didn't do this to you, Raphael. You did this to yourself with every dismissive comment, every humiliation, every conspiracy against me. What kind of son plans to institutionalize his mother just to avoid the inconvenience of her weekly visits?" "We were trying to help you," he insisted weakly. "No, you were trying to remove me from your life in a way that would preserve your public image as a devoted son," I corrected him. "If you had truly been concerned about my welfare, you would have treated me with dignity and respect, regardless of what you thought my financial situation was." I turned to the assembled guests, many of whom were now regarding Raphael and Gabriella with undisguised disgust. "I want to be clear. This isn't about money. It never was. This was about character, about how people treat those they believe have no power or value to offer them, Raphael and Gabriella failed that test in the most profound way possible. Gabriella, who had been silently seething, suddenly erupted. "You self-righteous old witch! You've been manipulating us for years, lying about who you are, spying on us, and now you want to play the victim?" Her outburst only underscored the truth of my assessment. Even now, facing the consequences of her own cruelty, she could only attack, not reflect or apologize. "I'm not playing anything, Gabriella. I'm simply revealing the truth. About myself, yes, but more importantly about you and Raphael. The kind of people who would conspire to declare an elderly parent incompetent just to gain control of what they believed was a modest house and small savings." I turned to Marcus. "I believe it's time." He nodded and began distributing documents to Raphael, Gabriella, and Bradley, formal notifications of the termination of all financial support, property usage, and employment. "You have 30 days to vacate this residence," Marcus explained professionally. "The vehicles must be returned within 48 hours. All company credit cards and accounts will be frozen as of midnight tonight." "You can't do this!" Raphael protested desperately. "Where are we supposed to go? How will we live?" The irony of his question, so similar to what many elderly parents face when abandoned by their children, was not lost on anyone in the room. "You're both educated adults with marketable skills," I replied calmly. "I'm sure you'll find a way to support yourselves, just as you always claimed to be doing." As the reality of their situation sank in, Gabriella collapsed into tears while Raphael sat staring at the documents, his world crumbling around him. I felt no joy in their distress, only a profound sadness that it had come to this. But as I looked around the table at the shocked faces of their friends and Gabriella's parents, I knew that the truth had needed to be revealed. Thomas Blackwell approached me, his expression grave. "Mrs. Perez, I want you to know that Eleanor and I had no idea about any of this. We would never have condoned such treatment of you, regardless of your financial situation." "I believe you, Thomas," I said sincerely. "And you're both welcome to stay in the guest house on my property until you find new accommodations. This situation is not of your making." As the guests began to make uncomfortable exits, Camilla came to stand beside me, placing a supportive hand on my shoulder. "Are you all right, Mom?" she asked softly. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years lifting from my shoulders. "Yes, I think I am. For the first time in a very long time, I don't have to pretend to be someone I'm not." As we prepared to leave, Raphael finally spoke again, his voice broken. "Mom, please. You can't just walk away from us. We're your family." I paused at the doorway, looking back at my son, still handsome in his expensive suit, but somehow smaller than he had been just hours before. "Family isn't defined by blood or legal documents, Raphael. It's defined by how we treat each other. When you learn that lesson, truly learn it, perhaps we can talk again." With those words, I walked out of the mansion, leaving behind the role of the humble, grateful mother I had played for too long. Outside, the sunshine felt different, brighter somehow, as if the world itself recognized my emergence from the shadows of my own making. Camilla squeezed my hand as we walked to my car, my real car, a sleek Lexus that Marcus had brought for me. "What now, Mom?" I smiled, feeling a sense of purpose and possibility I hadn't experienced in years. Now we build something good from all this pain, something that will help others who don't have the resources I had to protect themselves. The Invisible Women Foundation was about to become a reality, and with it, a new chapter in my life, one built on authenticity, purpose, and the freedom that comes from living your truth, whatever the cost. 3 weeks after Mother's Day, I sat in my penthouse office, reviewing reports from the transition team that had taken over Perez Construction. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city stretched before me like a living map, buildings glinting in the morning sun. So much had changed in such a short time, both in my business affairs and in my personal life. "The client retention rate is impressive, Mrs. Perez," said Eleanor Vasquez, the experienced construction executive I'd hired to lead the restructured company. "Nearly 85% have chosen to stay with us despite the management change." "And the remaining 15%? I asked, reviewing the spreadsheet she'd presented. "Mostly Raphael and Bradley's personal connections who left out of loyalty," Eleanor explained. "However, 3 clients cited concerns about unfinished work or poor quality from the previous management, which actually validates our decision to restructure." Eleanor was everything Raphael and Bradley had pretended to be: competent, ethical, and genuinely knowledgeable about construction. In just 3 weeks, she had overhauled the company's operations, restored relationships with contractors who had been underpaid, and implemented quality control measures that had been woefully lacking. "What about the employees? How are they adjusting?" I asked. "Better than expected," Eleanor replied. "Most were aware of the issues under Raphael and Bradley's leadership, but had nowhere else to go. The mid-level managers are particularly relieved. They were often caught between impossible demands from the top and the reality of what could actually be delivered." I nodded, thinking of the many people whose livelihoods had been jeopardized by my son's mismanagement. "And the Los Pinos project?" "We've revised the timeline and budget to realistic figures and informed the clients. Surprisingly, they were relieved. They'd begun to suspect the original projections were unrealistic." After reviewing the remaining business updates, Eleanor hesitated, then asked the question I knew was coming. "Have you heard from Raphael, Mrs. Perez?" I sighed, setting down my pen. "He's called several times. Left voicemails alternating between anger, pleading, and offers to work things out. I'm not ready to speak with him yet." "And Gabriella?" She sent a lengthy email, mostly accusations and justifications, not a single word of genuine remorse. I shook my head. "She still doesn't understand that this was never about the money. It was about how they treated someone they thought had no power." After Eleanor left, I called Marcus to check on the legal proceedings related to the mansion and vehicles. "Everything's proceeding as planned," he confirmed. "Raphael and Gabriella vacated the mansion yesterday, ahead of the 30-day deadline. The cars were returned last week, though I should mention the red Mercedes had several unexplained dents and scratches. Gabriella's final act of petty revenge, I surmised. "What about Thomas and Eleanor Blackwell?" "They accepted your offer of temporary housing in the guest house on your Lakewood property. Thomas called personally to express his gratitude and, quite frankly, his embarrassment over his daughter's behavior." "They shouldn't feel responsible," I said. "They were deceived just as much as anyone." "There's one more thing," Marcus added, his tone shifting. "Bradley Thompson is attempting to negotiate. He's offered to provide detailed evidence of Raphael and Gabriella's plans in exchange for leniency." Turning on his partner to save himself, I mused. Exactly the character I suspected he had. "Tell him I'll consider it, but make no promises." After finishing my business calls, I changed into more casual clothes and headed to a downtown cafe where I'd arranged to meet Emily Parker to discuss the progress of our foundation. The Invisible Women Foundation had moved from concept to reality with remarkable speed. With my financial backing and Emily's expertise, we had already secured office space, begun assembling a team of social workers and attorneys, and developed protocols for identifying and supporting elderly victims of family exploitation. Emily was waiting at a corner table surrounded by documents and a laptop. Her face lit up as I approached. "Laura, I have amazing news," she said as I sat down. "We've received preliminary approval for partnership with the state's Elder Services Division. This means they'll refer cases directly to us, dramatically expanding our reach. That's wonderful, I said, genuinely pleased. How many cases do you anticipate we'll handle in the first year? Based on current projections, somewhere between 150 and 200, Emily replied. But that's just the beginning. Once word spreads about our services, I expect those numbers to double in year 2. As she walked me through the foundation structure, legal services, emergency housing, financial counseling, and psychological support, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced in years. Something good was emerging from the ashes of my family tragedy. We've already identified our first 3 clients, Emily continued. One is a 72-year-old woman whose son has been forging her signature on bank withdrawals. Another is a 68-year-old man whose daughter and son-in-law moved him to their basement and are renting out his house while keeping the income. The third is a 70-year-old woman whose children are pressuring her to sign over her property by threatening to prevent her from seeing her grandchildren. Each case echoed elements of what Raphael and Gabriella had planned for me, but with victims who lacked my financial resources and power. When can we start helping them? I asked. We've already begun with preliminary legal work, Emily said. By next week, we should be ready to provide comprehensive services. As we continued discussing the foundation, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. I glanced at it briefly, then felt the blood drain from my face. Laura, is everything all right? Emily asked, noticing my reaction. It's from Gabriella, I said, showing her the message. You've destroyed our lives. Hope you're satisfied. Raphael lost everything because of your sick game. If anything happens to him, his blood is on your hands. Emily frowned. That sounds ominous. Do you think Raphael might harm himself? The possibility hadn't occurred to me, and it sent a chill through my heart. Despite everything, he was still my son. I don't know, I admitted. He's never been one to accept responsibility for his actions, but he's also never faced consequences of this magnitude before. Perhaps you should check on him, Emily suggested gently. Not out of obligation, but for your own peace of mind. After finishing my meeting with Emily, I called Marcus and asked him to locate Raphael. Within an hour, he called back with an address, a modest apartment in a middle-class neighborhood across town. Are you sure you want to do this? Marcus asked when I told him I planned to visit. After everything they did, you don't owe them anything. I'm not doing it for them, I replied. I'm doing it for me. I need to see the reality of their situation before I can truly move forward. The apartment building was unremarkable, clean but dated, the kind of place young professionals lived before establishing their careers. I took a deep breath before knocking on apartment 3B. The door opened to reveal a disheveled Raphael. His expensive haircut had grown out, his face bore several days' stubble, and his clothing, while still designer brands, looked rumpled, as if he'd slept in them. Behind him, I could see a sparsely furnished living room with moving boxes still unpacked. "Mom," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "What are you doing here?" "Gabriella texted me," I replied calmly. "She implied you might be in some kind of danger." He laughed bitterly. "Typical Gabriella, dramatic to the end. May as well come in since you're here." The apartment was small but functional, a far cry from the mansion they'd occupied just weeks ago, but hardly the desperate situation Gabriella had implied. "Where is Gabriella?" I asked, noticing no evidence of her presence. "Gone," Raphael said flatly. "Moved back to her parents' condo in Phoenix last week. Turns out she wasn't interested in for worse once for better disappeared." I wasn't surprised. Gabriella had always been clear about her priorities, and Raphael, without his wealth and status, held little appeal for her. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. Whatever their flaws, The collapse of a marriage was always painful. "Are you?" he asked, anger flashing in his eyes. "You destroyed everything I built. My company, my home, my marriage, all gone because of your twisted experiment." "I didn't destroy anything, Raphael," I replied steadily. "I simply stopped enabling the facade you were living behind. Everything you lost was actually mine to begin with." "So that makes it okay?" he demanded. "To spy on me, to record private conversations, to set me up for failure." "I didn't set you up for failure," I corrected him. "I gave you every opportunity to succeed. Financial backing, business connections, a safety net when you made mistakes. The only test was how you would treat me when you thought I had nothing to offer you, and you failed that test spectacularly." He turned away, unable to meet my gaze. "What am I supposed to do now? I'm 42 years old and starting from zero." "Most people start with far less than you have," I pointed out. "You have an education, experience, and connections beyond your relationship with me. The question is whether you'll use them to rebuild with integrity this time." Raphael slumped onto the sofa, running his hands through his hair. "I don't even know where to begin." For the first time since entering, I felt a flicker of hope. This wasn't the entitled, defensive Raphael who had dismissed me for years. This was a man confronting his failures and their consequences. "You begin by taking responsibility," I said, sitting across from him. "Not just for the collapse of your artificial success, but for how you treated me and others when you had power." He was quiet for a long moment. "I didn't start out this way, you know. When I first married Gabriella, I still cared about being a good son, but somewhere along the way, you allowed her contempt for me to become your own," I finished for him. "It was easier," he admitted, shame evident in his voice. "Going along with her dismissal of you meant I didn't have to feel guilty about how we were living while you seemed to struggle. And then it became a habit, seeing you as less than, as someone to be managed rather than respected." His admission wasn't an apology, but it was at least an acknowledgement of the truth. "And Sunset Gardens?" I asked. "The plan to have me declared incompetent?" He winced visibly. "That was mostly Gabriella's idea, but I didn't stop it. I told myself it was for your own good, that you'd be safer in a facility. But honestly, it was about convenience. Our convenience." "At least you can admit it now," I said. An uncomfortable silence fell between us. Despite everything, I felt a mother's instinct to help, to comfort, but I knew that impulse had enabled his worst behavior in the past. "I'm not here to rescue you, Raphael," I said finally. "You created this situation, and you need to find your own way out of it. But I didn't come here to punish you further either." "Then why did you come?" he asked. "To make sure you're all right, and to tell you something important," I replied. "What happened wasn't about money. It was about character. And character can be rebuilt even when everything else is lost." He looked up, a glimmer of something like hope in his eyes. "Do you think, could we ever fix things between us?" It was the question I'd been wrestling with since Mother's Day. Could our relationship be salvaged, or was the damage too profound? "I don't know," I answered honestly. "That depends on what you do now. Not what you say, but how you choose to live going forward. Reconciliation would require genuine change, not just regret over getting caught." I stood to leave, having seen what I came to see. Raphael wasn't in danger of self-harm. He was simply facing the natural consequences of his actions for the first time. At the door, I paused. "I'm starting a foundation to help elderly people who are being exploited or abused by family members, people who don't have my resources to protect themselves." "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because someday, when you've truly understood the impact of what you plan to do to me, you might want to make amends in a meaningful way. When that day comes, the foundation could use volunteers with business experience. I left him with that thought. Not an olive branch exactly, but a small opening, a potential path back if he chose to take it. As I drove away from Raphael's apartment, I felt lighter somehow. Not because our relationship was healed, it was far from that, but because I had faced the reality of the situation without either excessive harshness or misguided mercy. For the first time in years, I was relating to my son as one adult to another, without either the mask of poverty or the impulse to rescue him from himself. It wasn't the relationship I had hoped for, but it was honest, and honesty was something our family had lacked for far too long. 3 months after Mother's Day, my life had transformed in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. That morning, as I enjoyed my coffee on the terrace of my penthouse, watching the sunrise paint the city in hues of gold and pink, I reflected on how different everything felt. The view from my 25th floor window spanned the entire city. I could see the mountains in the distance, the river winding between buildings, and the perfectly manicured gardens of the public parks. This had been my real home for years, a sanctuary of peace and luxury I had kept secret while playing the part of the poor, needy grandmother. But now, living openly as myself brought a freedom I had almost forgotten was possible. No more maintaining 2 residences, no more changing clothes in my car before family visits, no more pretending to be less than I was. My phone chimed with a message from Camila. "Flight lands at 2 p.m. Can't wait to see you, Mom. The kids are so excited about staying in the castle in the sky, as they call it." I smiled, anticipating the joy of having my grandchildren visit. For years, I had kept Camila's family separate from Raphael, afraid of how he and Gabriella might treat them. Now that barrier was gone, and my life could be whole again. The elevator announced a visitor, and Diana Morris stepped into my apartment, immaculate as always in a cream pantsuit with a vibrant silk scarf. "Laura, darling, you look positively radiant," she declared, kissing my cheek. "Freedom suits you." "It does," I agreed, leading her to the terrace where breakfast was laid out. I hadn't realized how exhausting it was, maintaining that double life. Diana helped herself to coffee. "I've come with news about the social fallout. It's rather fascinating, actually." After Mother's Day, there had been inevitable ripples through the social circles Raphael and Gabriella had frequented. Diana had been monitoring the situation, partly to protect my reputation, and partly because we were both curious about how their former friends would react. "The country club set has divided into 3 camps," Diana reported, spreading jam on her croissant. "About half have completely distanced themselves from Raphael and Gabriella. Apparently, planning to institutionalize one's mother crosses a line even for that crowd. Another quarter are reserving judgment, waiting to see how it all plays out. And the remaining quarter—" "Let me guess," I interjected. "They're standing by Raphael and Gabriella, claiming I'm the villain for testing them." Diana nodded. "Led primarily by Jennifer Wilson, Gabriella's maid of honor and closest confidant. She's been quite vocal about your cruel deception and how no one should blame Raphael and Gabriella for reacting badly to such manipulation." I shrugged. "People will believe what aligns with their worldview. Those who prioritize appearances over character will naturally side with Raphael and Gabriella. What's most interesting is how quickly the business community adjusted," Diana continued. "Perez Construction's clients barely blinked at the transition. Several have actually commented that they're seeing improvements in communication and project management under Eleanor's leadership." This didn't surprise me. The business world respected competence above all else, and Eleanor delivered results that Raphael and Bradley had only promised. After breakfast, I headed downtown to the newly established offices of the Invisible Women Foundation. The space was bright and welcoming. I had insisted on an environment that made clients feel valued from the moment they entered. Too many services for the elderly were housed in dreary institutional settings that reinforced feelings of diminishment. Emily greeted me with a tablet in hand, already updating me as we walked toward the conference room. We've taken on 17 cases in our first month, Laura. The need is even greater than we anticipated. Inside the conference room, a team of lawyers, social workers, and financial advisors was gathered for our weekly case review. What had begun as a personal mission sparked by my own experience was rapidly growing into a significant organization with the potential to change many lives. Our most urgent case this week, Emily explained to the team, is Eleanor Matthews, 71, whose daughter and son-in-law have been systematically depleting her retirement accounts while isolating her from other family members. As the team discussed strategies to help Eleanor, legal interventions, financial protection measures, psychological support, I felt a profound sense of purpose. My pain was being transformed into protection for others, my wealth into a shield for those who would otherwise be vulnerable. After the meeting, I met privately with Janice Wilson, a 70-year-old woman who had been one of our first clients. When she first came to us, Janice had been sleeping on a friend's sofa after her son had sold her house out from under her, claiming she had signed documents authorizing the sale, documents she had no memory of signing. "Ms. Perez," she said, taking my hands in hers, "I wanted to thank you personally. Your legal team not only proved the documents were forged, but they've helped me secure an apartment I can actually afford on my Social Security." "I'm so glad we could help," I replied, genuinely moved by her gratitude. "It's more than help," Janice insisted. "It's dignity. For the first time since this nightmare began, someone believed me, fought for me. Do you know what that means to a woman my age who's been told she's confused, forgetful, a burden?" I did know, all too well. "That's exactly why we created this foundation, Janice. Because every person, regardless of age, deserves to be treated with respect and to have their autonomy protected." After Janice left, Emily approached with a curious expression. "There's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he was quite insistent." "Who is it?" I asked, though I had a suspicion. "Thomas Blackwell, Gabriella's father." I found Thomas waiting in our reception area, looking uncomfortable but determined. At 65, he was still handsome, with silver hair and the military bearing from his years of service. "Laura," he said, rising as I approached. "Thank you for seeing me." "Of course, Thomas. Why don't we talk in my office?" Once seated in the privacy of my office, Thomas seemed to struggle with where to begin. "Eleanor and I want to thank you again for the guest house," he finally said. "It's given us time to figure out our next steps." "You're welcome to stay as long as you need," I assured him. "That's actually part of why I'm here," he continued. "We found a condo we can afford with our savings, but before we move on, I needed to say something important to you." He took a deep breath. "I want to apologize for not seeing what was happening, for being complicit in how Raphael and Gabriella treated you. We should have spoken up." His sincerity was evident, and I appreciated his courage in coming to me directly. "You were deceived just as much as anyone, Thomas." "No," he said firmly. "We saw signs, the way they spoke to you, the seating arrangements at dinner, the tasks they assigned you. We may not have known about their plans for Sunset Gardens, but we witnessed the disrespect and said nothing." I nodded, acknowledging his point. "Why didn't you say something?" Thomas looked ashamed. "Because we were comfortable. Because Raphael provided for us in ways we couldn't provide for ourselves after I took early retirement. Because it was easier to look away." He shook his head in self-disgust. "We compromised our values for comfort." His honesty was refreshing, especially in contrast to Raphael and Gabriella's continued justifications. What will you do now? I asked. Start over in a way, he replied. I found part-time work as a security consultant. It's not much, but combined with our savings and Eleanor's small pension, we'll manage. He hesitated, then added, and we've cut ties with Gabriella, at least for now. This surprised me. She's your daughter, Thomas. Yes, and we love her, he said sadly. But we can't condone what she did or who she's become. We've told her that until she takes responsibility for her actions and makes genuine amends, we need to keep our distance. It was a difficult but principled stance, and I respected them for it. That couldn't have been easy. No, but it was necessary, for us and for her. She'll never change if everyone around her enables her behavior. He smiled ruefully. I suppose we learned that lesson from you. As Thomas was leaving, he turned at the door. There's one more thing. Eleanor and I would like to volunteer here at the foundation, if you'll have us. Eleanor was a nurse before retirement, and I have experience with security protocols that might help protect your vulnerable clients. His offer touched me deeply. We'd welcome your help, both of you. After Thomas left, I spent the afternoon in meetings with financial advisors, planning the foundation's expansion to 3 additional cities within the next year. The work energized me in a way that my secret financial management never had. Perhaps because this was not just about money, but about justice and protection for those who needed it most. That evening, I welcomed Camila and her family to my penthouse. My grandchildren, Alex, 10, and Sophia, 7, raced through the rooms, marveling at the views and the space so different from my pretend home in Oakwood, which they had never visited. Mom, this place is amazing, Camila said, joining me on the terrace after the children were settled. I still can't believe you maintained that other life for so long. Neither can I, looking back, I admitted. It started with good intentions, wanting Raphael to develop character independent of family wealth, but it evolved into something much more complicated. Camila sipped her wine thoughtfully. Have you heard from him recently? Yes, actually. He's been sending emails, more reflective than his initial angry outbursts. He started working for a small construction company as a project manager. Apparently he's good at it when he's not cutting corners or misrepresenting capabilities. Do you think he's genuinely changing? She asked. It's too early to tell, I replied honestly. Real change takes time and usually comes through difficulty. This is his first experience with genuine adversity. We'll see who emerges from it. The next morning, I took my grandchildren to the park while Camila and her husband enjoyed some rare time alone. As I watched Alex and Sophia play, I noticed a familiar figure approaching from across the playground. Raphael looked different, thinner, more plainly dressed, but somehow more substantial than before. He hesitated when he saw me, clearly unsure if he would be welcome. I nodded slightly, indicating he could join me on the bench. I didn't expect to see you here, he said, sitting down at a respectful distance. I'm with Camila's children, I explained, gesturing toward Alex and Sophia on the swings. Your niece and nephew. Raphael watched them for a moment, his expression unreadable. They seem great. I didn't even know what they looked like until now. That was my choice, I told him. I kept Camila's family separate from you and Gabriella because I didn't trust how you would treat them. He winced but didn't argue. That's fair, given how we treated you. We sat in silence for a few minutes, watching the children play. There was an awkwardness between us, but also a strange new honesty that had never existed before. I've been thinking a lot, Raphael finally said, about what you said. That character can be rebuilt even when everything else is lost. And I'm trying to do that. It's harder than I thought it would be. He gave a self-deprecating smile. Turns out I'm not as naturally talented as I believed. Without your invisible support, I'm just average. There's nothing wrong with average, I pointed out. Most of the world is. The question is whether you're honest, kind, and hardworking, not whether you're exceptional. He nodded slowly. I've been seeing a therapist. She's helping me understand how I became so entitled, how I justified treating you the way I did. It was more self-awareness than I had expected, but I remained cautious. Understanding is just the beginning. Real change comes through consistent action over time. I know, he acknowledged. That's why I didn't call or visit. I wanted to have something to show you beyond just words. And what do you have to show? I asked. Not much yet, he admitted. 3 months of honest work, an apartment I can actually afford, a few therapy insights. It's not impressive, but it's real at least. There was a humility in his assessment that I had never heard from him before. It wasn't a dramatic transformation, but perhaps it was the beginning of one. Mom, I don't expect forgiveness, he continued when I didn't respond. What Gabriella and I planned to do to you was unforgivable, but I want you to know I'm truly sorry, and I'm trying to become someone different, someone better. Raphael, forgiveness isn't the issue, I said carefully. I've already forgiven you because holding on to anger would only harm me. But forgiveness is different from reconciliation. Reconciliation requires rebuilt trust, and trust takes time. He nodded, accepting this boundary without protest, another change from the entitled son who had always expected immediate absolution for any offense. I saw your foundation in the news, he said, changing the subject. It's doing important work. It is, I agreed. We're helping people who don't have the resources I had to protect themselves. You mentioned volunteers, he said tentatively. When you visited my apartment, is that offer still open? I studied him carefully. It might be eventually. But not yet, Raphael. The foundation works with vulnerable people who have been harmed by family members like you. I can't risk exposing them to someone who hasn't fully demonstrated change. Instead of the indignation this rejection would have previously triggered, he simply nodded. I understand. Maybe someday, when I've earned it. As Alex and Sophia ran over to me, breathless from play, I introduced them to Raphael. This is your Uncle Raphael, I said simply. They regarded him with the direct curiosity of children. Do you live in a castle in the sky too? Sophia asked. Raphael laughed, a genuine laugh I hadn't heard in years. No, I live in a very ordinary apartment, but it's enough for me. After a brief, slightly awkward interaction with the children, Raphael stood to leave. Thank you for talking with me, Mom. I don't expect anything, but I hope maybe we can do this again sometime. I didn't make promises I wasn't sure I could keep. We'll see, Raphael, one step at a time. As he walked away, Camilla approached, having observed our interaction from a distance. Was that wise? She asked, concern evident in her voice. I don't know, I replied honestly, but I think it was necessary for both of us. 6 months after Mother's Day, the Invisible Women Foundation held its official launch gala at the city's finest hotel. The event had drawn supporters from across the country, business leaders, politicians, advocates for the elderly, and prospective donors. I stood at the podium, surveying the crowded ballroom. On one table sat photographs of our first 30 clients, each with a brief description of how the foundation had helped them reclaim their dignity, security, and independence. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, thank you for joining us tonight to support a cause that remains largely invisible in our society, the financial exploitation and psychological abuse of elderly adults by their own family members. The room grew quiet as I shared statistics about this hidden epidemic. How many seniors lost their homes, savings, and autonomy to predatory relatives each year? How few resources existed to help them, and how shame often kept them silent. But statistics don't tell the real story, I continued. The real story is about people like Mary, who at 75 found herself homeless after her son sold her house and abandoned her. Or James, whose daughter controlled his Social Security checks while keeping him isolated from friends and other family. Or Eloise, who was being pressured to sign over her life savings under threat of never seeing her grandchildren again. I paused, knowing that what I was about to share was deeply personal but necessary. Some of you may have heard rumors about my own experience, how I discovered that my son and daughter-in-law were planning to have me declared incompetent and institutionalized, believing I was a financially dependent burden they wanted to be rid of. A murmur ran through the crowd. The story had circulated in certain circles, but this was my first public acknowledgement of it. What made my situation unusual was that I had the resources to protect myself. I had been testing my son's character by allowing him to believe I was dependent on him, while actually supporting him financially from behind the scenes. When I discovered his plans for me, I was able to reveal the truth and protect myself. I looked around the room, making eye contact with as many guests as possible. But most elderly victims don't have millions in hidden assets or teams of lawyers at their disposal. They are truly vulnerable, truly dependent, and truly at risk. That's why this foundation exists, to be for them what I was fortunate enough to be for myself, a protector, an advocate, and a path to justice. The rest of my speech outlined our programs, our early successes, and our plans for expansion. By the end, the energy in the room was palpable, a mixture of outrage at the injustices we had described and determination to support our solutions. As I mingled with guests afterward, accepting congratulations and pledges of support, I noticed a familiar figure standing quietly at the back of the ballroom. Raphael had come, though I hadn't sent him an invitation. He was dressed simply but appropriately, watching the proceedings with an expression I couldn't quite read. I made my way to him, curious about his presence. "I hope it's all right that I came," he said when I approached. "I read about the gala in the newspaper and bought a ticket. I wanted to see the foundation in action." "It's all right," I assured him, surprised to find I meant it. "Your speech was powerful," he said, "especially when you talked about your personal experience." He hesitated, then added, "It's strange to hear yourself described as the villain in someone else's story, even when you know it's true." "Is that how you see yourself now, as the villain?" I asked. "I see myself as someone who made terrible choices," he replied carefully. "Someone who betrayed the most fundamental trust between a son and his mother, but I'm trying not to let that define me forever." We were interrupted by Emily, who needed me to meet an important potential donor. As I excused myself, Raphael handed me an envelope. "I can't attend as a volunteer yet. I understand that," he said, "but perhaps this can help in another way." Later that night, after the gala had ended and I was alone in my penthouse, I opened Raphael's envelope. Inside was a check for $25,000, a substantial sum given his current circumstances, along with a handwritten note. "Mom, this represents every dollar I've managed to save over the past 6 months. It isn't much compared to what you've invested, but it's everything I have. Please use it to help someone who needs protection for people like I was. I don't know if we'll ever rebuild what was broken between us, but I want you to know I'm trying to become someone worthy of a second chance, not because I expect one, but because it's the right thing to do." With deep respect and regret, Raphael, I sat with the letter for a long time, watching the city lights flicker below. The money itself was less significant than what it represented. Genuine sacrifice from someone who had once believed he deserved everything without earning it. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but perhaps it was the beginning of a path that might someday lead there. As I prepared for bed, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past year. From the humiliated mother sitting alone at a folding table to the founder of a groundbreaking foundation. From a woman playing a role to a woman fully embracing her authentic self. The greatest revelation wasn't about Raphael or Gabriella or the power of wealth. It was about me, about discovering that at 64, I could completely reinvent myself, that it was never too late to demand respect, to live authentically, to create meaning from pain. The elderly woman they had dismissed as irrelevant had transformed not just her own life, but potentially the lives of countless others who would benefit from the foundation. The mother they had planned to discard had found purpose and power beyond anything she had known before. As I drifted toward sleep, I remembered something my husband had often said before he died. True wealth isn't measured by what you have, but by what you give. In losing the facade of poverty, I had found a richness of purpose I never could have imagined. And in that, there was a justice more satisfying than any revenge could have provided. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below and let me know your thoughts. And don't forget to check out 2 other stories that are channel favorites: My Daughter Stole My Identity and The Will That Changed Everything.